When you're asked to analyze a book for English class, it's hard to know where to start. You have the text in front of you, but how do you actually come up with a unique interpretation that reveals the text's deeper meaning? I'm Miss Peer Editor, and in this video I'm going to eliminate some of the mystery surrounding the art of literary analysis and explain 6 different approaches to help you interpret any piece of prose or poetry. If you find my advice helpful, please subscribe. My first tip is to research the author beforehand. We often jump into a book without any context. As a result, we're confused when an author uses vocabulary that we would consider to be odd, or when they describe societal expectations that seem outdated. I recommend that you look into an author's upbringing, their time period, and any other literary movements that the author is a part of. By taking a few minutes to research the author, you'll be able to identify signposts or specific characteristics that set the literary work apart from others. Let's take a look at the history of Louisa May Alcott, the author of the novel Little Women, which was published in the 1860s. This book follows a family of 4 sisters in New England as they grow up during the American Civil War and start to carve out different paths for their futures. If we examine the author's history, we can see that Alcott experienced poverty as a child, and her father, Amos Bronson Alcott, was a transcendentalist educator who established schools that encouraged free thinking as well as an appreciation for nature and the arts. Thus, Louisa was influenced by transcendental writers, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, among others. Alcott volunteered as a nurse in a Union hospital after the Civil War started, but she contracted typhoid and had to go home. Though she suffered poor health throughout her life, she continued to write and advocate for women's rights as a member of the women's suffrage movement. So knowing Alcott's history helps bring her book to life, and we can see that she's imbued each character with a different aspect of her own personality. Like the character of Beth, she struggled with ailments. Like Mr. March, the patriarch of the family, she served in the American Civil War. Like Jo, she was a free spirit with a burning desire to become a published author. To create a unique analysis, we can apply some of Alcott's own motivations to those of her characters, while also applying characteristics of the transcendental movement to her work. Jo's warring desires to support her family and become a successful author probably mirrored the author's internal battle, proving that women during this time period had to repress parts of their identities to fulfill their social obligations. Meanwhile, transcendentalism emphasizes the value of intuition, spirituality, independence, and the individual's innate goodness, an overall philosophy that guides Jo when she pursues her dream and when the March family prioritizes compassion and generosity over accumulating material wealth for themselves. My second tip is often intertwined with the first, and it's to research the historical period in which the book was written or the time period in which the book's plot takes place. This tip doesn't just apply to historical fiction. This tip can help even if you're reading a realist novel, science fiction, alternate history, or other genres. Let's say you're reading The Grapes of Wrath, a John Steinbeck novel written in 1939, which was the tail end of the Great Depression in the United States. Knowing details about the Great Depression, such as the Dust Bowl, the plight of farm workers, the creation of Hoovervilles, and the New Deal, will help you better understand the adversity the main characters face in this book. On the other hand, The Underground Railroad is a 2016 novel by Colson Whitehead that combines the historical fiction and alternate history genres. It takes place in the American South during the era of slavery, and more specifically within the 1800s. The Underground Railroad is the real term for the clandestine network of routes that enslaved people followed to escape from slavery in the South to freedom in the northern states or in Canada. In this book, the author imagines the Underground Railroad as a literal train system that runs underground. Knowing the difference between the real historical Underground Railroad and the one that the author envisions helps illustrate the sheer bravery, grit, and navigational prowess that escapees and their guides had, especially when you compare these qualities to the technological ingenuity of a physical railroad. And the book shows that dreams aren't as far-fetched as they seem, as long as the dreamer has hope and perseveres. After all, the main character, Cora, is able to use this railroad to find her way to freedom. My third tip is to compare a book with other books, movies, music, and current or historical events with similar situations. This exercise of comparison will help you identify key themes or universal ideas about human nature that are often recurring in art. I suggest that you check out my video on how to write a theme statement. I'll put a link to that in the description box below. Let's consider this example. The play Medea is an ancient Greek tragedy in which a woman, Medea, resolves to take revenge against her unfaithful husband. This plot might remind you of Carrie Underwood's song, Before He Cheats. There's a significant time difference between when these two pieces of art were created, but that suggests that humans have been feeling the pain of betrayal and infidelity throughout our species' entire existence. In Carrie Underwood's song, the main character wrecks the car of her cheating lover, while Medea goes on a murderous rampage. Obviously, those two actions are not the same, but they both show that people try to destroy the things that others love to secure vengeance. In the case of Medea, people can take their thirst for revenge to the extreme, and they can even be blinded to the consequences of their actions. My fourth approach will specifically help you analyze objects that you think might be symbols in literature. Let's analyze the famous symbol of the green light in The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. First, describe the object in terms of the five senses. Does the writer portray these attributes positively or negatively? In this book, we have a green light that's bright and it burns through the night, and it has a positive connotation. Ask yourself, where is the object situated, and is that place important to a particular character? This green light is placed at the end of the dock that belongs to Daisy Buchanan, the woman who Jay Gatsby loves. So this light represents the distance separating Gatsby and Daisy. Next, determine how many times the object appears in the text. The green light appears at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the novel, which establishes a sense of continuity. The idea of living a life with Daisy is a continuous dream that sustains Gatsby over a long period of time. Think about whether the object is placed side by side with another object. Are the two items similar or different? At the end of the book, Nick Carraway, the narrator, thinks about the Dutch sailors who saw this fresh green breast of the New World. A lot of people talk about the fact that green is the color of money, which is related to the materialism and lavish lifestyles of the 1920s, which is the setting of the novel. But green also represents new beginnings and new life. The green light represents Gatsby's desire for a rebirth, for a new identity. After all, he changes his name from James Gatz to Jay Gatsby. Lastly, determine the literal and the figurative purpose of the object. The purpose of the light is to show passing boats that the dock is present, especially at night. So the literal purpose is tied to the figurative purpose, which is to serve as a constant reminder of Daisy's presence, one that is just out of reach for Gatsby. My fifth tip is to separate the book into 3 to 5 chunks, and once you're finished with each chunk, do 2 things. Write your perception of the main characters and what you predict is going to happen. You'll be able to explain how each character evolves throughout the book by articulating the traits that they start to acquire or lose. Stopping at each chunk will show you that character's qualities at that point in time without imposing any biases that you'll have once you've read the whole book. This exercise will also help you understand the author's strategy when mapping out the plot. If the plot unfolds exactly how you expected, that may mean that the author is simply telling a story to give you a glimpse into the characters' lives and their motivations. The book may not be a suspense-driven story, but rather an examination of why certain events are occurring. Moreover, keeping track of the plot helps you identify irony. You'll be able to discern ordinary irony, in which expectations and reality are different, along with dramatic irony, in which the reader or audience knows something that the characters don't. My sixth tip is to identify a single emotional effect in an excerpt of the book. Edgar Allan Poe is well known for his single effect theory, in which he argued that a short story should leave a lasting emotional impression on the reader that can be summed up in a single word or phrase. For his short stories, that single effect was usually something along the lines of paranoia, guilt, or terror. I encourage you to take this theory and instead apply it to a chapter or a sizable chunk of the book that you're reading. It's probably unlikely that an entire 200-page book can be summed up in one word, but a chapter or section may have a unifying effect. Once you determine that effect, you can analyze which literary devices contribute to that effect. For instance, there's a section in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice in which the heroine, Elizabeth Bennet, reads a letter from Mr. Darcy after he proposes to her and she rejects him, basically calling him a bad friend who is pompous and selfish. In the letter, Mr. Darcy explains why he acted the way he did in certain situations, such as the way he stepped in to prevent his sister from being taken advantage of by another character, Mr. Wickham, who wanted to steal his sister's inheritance. While this letter doesn't totally absolve Mr. Darcy of his wrongdoings, it does explain his point of view, and it makes him seem a little bit less arrogant in Elizabeth's eyes. The emotional effect here is regret or shame, which is felt both by Elizabeth and probably the reader too. Elizabeth regrets her blindness in accepting one version of events unequivocally without evaluating all the facts. Thank you so much for watching. In the comments, let me know if you found these tips useful, and feel free to suggest any other video topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.